Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We were lingering a little bit because this apparently is a really fun ride that we're in for, but it starts and then it goes. And so people joining late, we won't not allow them to join us, but they miss a key part of it. I'm speaking through the microphone because that's apparently the only way that people on Zoom can hear us, and it looks like we have a couple people joining us remotely. So welcome to them also. This is a very interactive workshop from what I hear. So for those of you on Zoom, what I'm going to do is get logged onto my email. This is Jennifer Adams speaking. So hopefully you have my email because I've sent out so many email announcements about this particular workshop, series of workshops. But in case you don't, it's jennifer.adams@dhha.org. So if you have questions or comments or want to participate, just email me in real time and I'll stay logged on and can convey that to the group and speak on your behalf. So with that, we are super excited to welcome Dr. Dave Hirsh back for day 2. Many of you were here, but not all of you, for his events yesterday. For those of you who were here, you know how much fun we had and what fun we're in for again today. Dave Hirsh is a beloved educator who joins us from the Harvard Medical School, where he's perhaps best known for his work in longitudinal integrated clerkships, but really in a wide range of educational pursuits. This first workshop focuses more on a general overview of innovative pedagogy, and I think this will apply to the work that we're doing in curriculum reform, both to our work in LICs, but more broadly to some of the exciting work we're doing. And I hear this is going to be super fun, so welcome.
Yes, I'm only thinking, thank you, Jennifer. Can I just ask one question? Should we have the mic available so the people on Zoom can hear? Otherwise, I'll have to, I'm happy to repeat questions, but it's sort of more fun if we popcorn around.
So let me see. So why don't we do this? This is a...
Is that okay? Yeah.
One, and if people need to say anything, then I'll walk around with this.
Okay, or I can repeat questions too. All right, so good morning. I'm very happy to arise again to another beautiful Colorado sky and day. Today, we're going to engage in something which is different than yesterday. So today, I want to just give a stance for the start. So when we think about pedagogy, we think about stance, structure, and practices. So stance we could talk about at a different time. But yesterday, we were talking and largely about ways to do educational structure and some things about educational practices when we were considering these various sciences of learning. But today, we're going to be squarely in the domain of educational practices, like things we do in the classroom, teacher decision-making, how you animate a classroom. So it's much more interactive in that sense. And what I want to do is get us right into this at the start, because it starts at the start and it goes. Like yesterday, I have the compulsion just to use kind of metaphor in the titles. So I call it dynamic pedagogy, because we're going to get into this way of animating the classroom. Philosophy and joy. So it's the philosophy of dynamic pedagogy and the joy of doing dynamic pedagogy. But what we're going to do is we're going to go on a serious romp in moral philosophy. We're going to do moral philosophy. Now, but we didn't prepare for moral philosophy. We've not studied moral philosophy. Truly, if we do these things, typically you have students prepare what they're going to be then engaging in, and then you do the animated classroom. But you'll see, I think, that you need not know anything about the issues at hand, and you can still have a dynamic classroom. So in some ways, if we can pull this off with nobody having prepared readings from moral philosophy, I think you can see how we could imagine doing this if everyone had prepared. But I also want to say that as we go here, I think the point for choosing something that is not a medicine topic, a physical therapy topic, a science topic, a PEDS topic, or whatever topic, is because I don't want you thinking about the content. I want you to be thinking about the teacher decisions, the teacher moves, the way the classroom is animating. So in other words, I'm going to sacrifice myself to the cause because you'll find things that you think, oh, those are pretty good, and things you think, I wouldn't have made that choice. And I want to sort of just try it out in front of you so that we can then dissect it for the second half of our morning together. So 45 minutes of a moral philosophy ride you have to go on that we can try to do all sorts of educational practices, pedagogical things in a classroom in order to pull those things apart and then practice yourselves at the end. All right, so although cute name, this is actually what we're going to do. Exercise, an analysis, and a training in how to animate the classroom. All right, so I have no financial disclosures or conflicts of interest, and I must thank the two great authors who use a similar session to this to do the same point, to really animate classrooms. The person who I think does this most splendidly on all the earth is the great Michael Sandel, who teaches a course called Justice at Harvard College. It is just a truly elegant teacher, and he does this session actually in a room of 1,000 people, right? So you can do this in very small one-on-ones all the way to very large classrooms, with the point being, how do you get the classroom to popcorn up and be part of the discussion? All right, so here's the game plan. First, this introduction, which is now over. Then the exercise itself, which is the trolley problem for moral philosophy. We will do an analysis of the exercise, kind of looking at the things that I did or looking at the things that animate a classroom. We're going to dissect it. Then we actually can try to practice it. And then this like little next steps for the future. And I want to make sure that I know. So at what time do you want to end? Because I can do more or less trolley problem depending. It's absolutely perfect. 90 minutes is my favorite time for this. All right, so are we stretched out? Let's just do a quick thing to stretch out. If you were going to raise your hand in a comment like you were, which hand would you raise? Okay, if you were going to raise the hand that's the awkward hand and you're just, it's hard to raise the hand, which hand would you raise? Right, good, because you're going to have to think about this. It's going to feel a little awkward to hop into a conversation you know nothing about. So it's kind of like that odd hand. So that is the first. The second thing is, does everybody know each other, or reasonably so? Or should we do a quick Zoom round of? All right, I'm David Hirsh. I come from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cool. We've warmed up our mouths, we've warmed up our arms, we understand awkwardness is forthcoming, we're already not fearing moral philosophy. All right, so here we go to the exercise for about 45 minutes or so. We're celebrating right now, actually, or commemorating at any rate, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. It turns out that our story begins 7 days after the actual D-Day. On that morning, it was about 4:30 in the morning, there was an incredibly large thud in a cabbage patch, like a farm patch, just south of London. Nobody knew what this was. It turns out it was the first of the Vergeltungswaffe, the V-1 rocket. It was the first of the V-1 rockets sent by Germany over England. This particular rocket, which they called the revenge weapon, was a new form of horror, actually, for the British, who they already endured all these long years of the Blitz, of the bombing of the surface of England, and London in particular. So now comes the V-1 rocket. The British, being kind of cheeky, they called it by the name buzz bombs, because it would buzz across the sky, and when it turned silent, it's when it ran out of gas, the buzzing would stop, and that's actually when the more fearful, scary thing would happen. It would fall to earth in that silence, and then the dangerous thing would happen thereafter. The explosion would happen thereafter. But the British also called them doodlebugs because they didn't want to scare the children. So there's the doodlebugs, and they were trying to be kind of light about it. There was nothing light about it. It was an awful thing. And so it turns out there were a series of explosions south of London. And what was fortunate was these were not on target. Churchill in London finds out about these things. And one of his advisors comes to him and says, looks like there's a new terrible weapon. This is a rocket, and it's landing south of the target. I mean, they clearly want to be hitting central London, where the military installations are, where the seats of government are. It's falling south. We should run a misinformation campaign to have the Germans thinking that they're landing on target, or have the Germans thinking that they're landing north. Because if the Germans thought they were landing north, they would target them even more south, even more off target. So Churchill was faced with this interesting question, because the Germans were going to retarget the weapon. But the problem is although if it didn't hit in central London, that was good news for the nation, right? It wouldn't be hitting these major things that could actually bring down the country. But he was then deciding where it would hit. And population centers south of London would be the places that these weapons would hit. So Churchill was faced with a who shall live and who shall die scenario. Also the good of the many or the good of the few, or in this case, the bad of the many and the bad of the few, right? Trying to preserve the whole nation, but putting at risk, putting directly in harm's way, a population of non-military people south of the target. Churchill would not have known this, though, but just several miles away, actually not even so many miles away, there would be two women cowering in a bathtub together. Why in a bathtub? So it turns out that when bombs hit in the area, people would hop into bathtubs and sometimes even put like a mattress over the top. Bathtubs are very hard. The mattress would, be protective if anything should fall. So it was a common practice to hop in the tub together, roommates or whatever. So these two women are hopped in this bathtub, having heard the bombings over the next several days. Churchill didn't know about the women didn't know about Churchill's who shall live or who shall die decision. Who are these women? So one was Iris Murdoch, and one was, then her name was, Philippa Bosanquet. It turns out that Iris Murdoch and Philippa Bosanquet were two of the most important, maybe the single two most important philosophers in the Western world, and certainly maybe the two of the most important female philosophers of all time in any world. There they were, cowering in the bathtub. So how did they enter our story? Philippa Bosanquet later gets married. She shortens her first name to Pip. Many Philippas call themselves Pip. So she becomes Pip Foote. And in 1967, Pip Foote, one more fun thing about Pip Foote, turns out, this I think is a good fun twist to the story. She actually was the daughter of somebody. She was the daughter of a woman who herself was born in the White House. So her mother was the daughter of two presidents, because, an excellent guess. But it was actually Cleveland and Cleveland, because Cleveland was actually elected twice, 2 terms, with a term in between. So that was a good guess. Grover Cleveland's daughter then had Philippa Bosanquet. Now Pip Foote. So Pip Foote in 1967, anyway, in her philosophy prowess is growing, writes a very interesting little piece, kind of an obscure philosophy journal called the Oxford Philosophy Review. And she putatively was writing to consider the issue of abortion. But it turns out that the way this story is remembered has nothing to do with abortion anymore. It's remembered in much more kind of classic philosophical ways. This little story that she wrote becomes one of the most, I guess I would say, pop culture issues of all of philosophy, the so-called trolley experiment. Apparently, the trolley experiment has been popularized recently on some Netflix show, right? So this is actually even known now in the US more than before. We will do, now all of that lead in, we will do the trolley experiment together. I'm sort of good to go on the trolley experiment, and you'll be too. For this to work, though, we're going to do about 40 minutes now of moral philosophy, where we will deliberate together, and we'll characterize what I would think or what I would do, and what's the principle that underpins my decision, and I will sort of try to animate the classroom using the story. She wrote a story. Pip Foote wrote the story of the trolley experiment, and it goes a little something like this: there's a trolley going down a track, and there are 5 people on the track. A trolley is a train, a heavy train. 5 people on the track who cannot get out of the way. So the trolley is going to hit these 5 people, and they will die. It turns out that there's a spur, they call it, like a little side track, a little other track that the trolley can go on, a spur off of the track. And off on the spur, there is one person, currently not in harm's way. But if the trolley were to be diverted to that side track, that person would be killed by the trolley. But for now, the trolley is heading towards the 5. You are faced with being a person. You see what's happening here. You see the spur, you see the people in 5, you see the trolley coming, you know what's going to happen, you know they can't get out of the way. They're quite torpid. And anyway, the trolley's going towards them, and you have a lever. And if you pull this lever, you will divert the trolley from hitting the 5, and it will go off to the spur and hit the 1. So you have a decision to make. The 5, or your decision, diverts the trolley to the 1 person not currently in harm's way. So to begin, we should vote. Actually, I can pause for a second. Everyone have the scenario set? All right. You see how you're sort of like Churchill in this scenario? Okay. Who shall live, who shall die? Many, few. All right. So who among us right now would pull the lever and divert the trolley? Okay, for the Zoom people, that it was maybe 90% of the room. And who here would not pull the lever? Okay, who didn't vote? All right. Did you want to offer? Fair enough. Yeah, there's always. Fair enough. I think there's always a possibility, and I think in the medical sciences and in education, we should hold ourselves to an idea: is there a third way? Is there a fourth way? Is there some other way? I'm not going to buy the scenario. But if you had to buy the scenario, you can vote in either direction. Do you have a sense of which way you would vote? Excellent. So before you go into the principle that would guide you, so just vote at the start, and then we'll do the very things that you're doing. We'll try to think about that. Yeah. You will. Okay. So that's actually the first time in all my years of doing this. Is there anybody who would not pull? Okay. So let's argue. So for people in the Zoom crowd, everyone pulled. And what's the rationale that's underpinning why you'd pull? Yeah, so if you're hurting fewer people, killing fewer people, or 5, you're comparing numbers, 5 to 1. Now there are things to consider. Yeah.
I think there's a balance between the idea that you're taking an action to harm someone versus
Yes.
doing something that is greater.
Yes. I'm just going to repeat only because of the Zoom people. So like you're taking some action, and then if you take your action, maybe you can do a greater good thing because one person is fewer than 5. But that action does hurt someone. Is anybody bothered by the fact of the action hurting someone? Yes. Is everyone, Zoom people, everyone is bothered by the action, that the action is hurting someone. But how about this other question, though? Action versus inaction. Is there anything important there? Like, is action a choice? Is inaction a choice? So are action and inaction different morally? Right, so an action of omission versus an action of commission is in play in this conversation. But nonetheless, it seems like that didn't have a sort of moral weight, at least I'm assuming that it didn't have moral weight to you guys. What did have moral weight was the 5 and the 1. Are there other things that gave you sort of decision-making urges?
It seems like the way the story, we're sure it's going to kill the one, but I'm not sure it's going to kill the other.
Right, so maybe. Okay. Very good. So the question, so let's say we phrase it this way. What if we say we're sure it's going to kill 5 or we're sure it's going to kill 1 and there's no plausible way of not having it happen? Does it change anybody? How do we feel? We feel awful no matter, we feel awful in any case. This is only a heuristic. This is not actually reality. There are no, yeah.
May not necessarily be true in some fashion.
Very important point, right? So there's two keys to this. One is we are doing a valuation. And the valuation has at least 2 elements. One element is sort of what is the value of a life, and like, can you add up values of lives? Is it 5 people of certain value and 1 of another value? So how would you maybe perturb this, or where could this go? Where were you going with this a little bit? Okay. Yes. Yes.
You know, versus like a 5-year. I don't know. I mean,
yes. 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 Yeah. None of us are saying like, I cannot believe Rita. Oh my God. No, we're not doing any kind of judging people's rationale. Just as like, what are the rationales in play? So one other kind of rationale in play is like, how much longevity would be left? So if it's people who are much older, they may have fewer years to live than someone who is younger, or people who are sicker maybe wouldn't survive anyway in the near future, where people who are more healthy might, right? Or some way of determining things about the individual lives and be adding that up. But we're still in this process of adding, right? Evaluating, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking it's a tragedy either way, but exponentially 5 families, friends versus
right. Right. So that's right. Tragic, sad, horrible, no matter what, but there's also this, like, a life itself may be surrounded by many other people. There are family, there are friends, there are future family, who knows, right? So it's even, like, the size seems like it's exponentially larger than just even 5 and 1. Yes?
And I think also the potential for contribution
yes.
in a future life. Perhaps, there are poets and artists and, all that could contribute to the world. Perhaps more in terms of quantity.
Yes. Right, so and a very good point, like what people potentially could do. There are poets, there are artists, there are physical therapists, right? There are all these good people to come. And this question then could be, like, what's the loss? It's like, not only is there the loss of the individual, but there's another whole category of loss. And still, I think we're sitting in this area of evaluating or weighing or counting or something, right?
I'm adding a comment from
Sure,
Zoom.
sure.
So it's very similar to what you just said, but the comment that came through on the wire was the sort of concept of leadership, and is one a brilliant leader and the other five are not.
Right, so
It's similar to what
yeah, and I like this one. Thank you, Zoom hop-in emailer. This is great because I can give you a different name if you want to offer me a name. This very important thing, like this could be someone who's a leader, and something other people maybe they would not be so leaderly and I don't know, functioning to serve society. You could also flip it, couldn't you? You could say there's like harmful, heinous, like rough kind of folks versus like nice kind of folks or something like that. Yep.
Yes, I guess that there would be things that we wouldn't want to recognize that would go into the evaluation too, like in group versus out of group.
Thank you. Yes, right, because there's all sorts of, there's unconscious bias might be in play here too, or even conscious bias might be in play, in group, out group, privileged, less privileged, underserved, served, right? All sorts of things that afflict humankind already could be in play on our evaluating. But I'm sensing, though, we're still counting, valuing, weighing. Did you want to go with one? All right. So does anybody know, let's just do this. Would anybody try to argue the other side, the side that I would not pull?
Why would people be walking on the trolley line while it's coming straight for them?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Right, that's true. Yes, that's right. So there is this exactly one. So there's somebody not in harm's way. Some degree, perhaps, of culpability, responsibility. Right, the natural thing that's predictable is you're on a trolley track with a trolley coming at you. The other person wasn't doing anything of the sort. It was sort of, we could use the word even be innocent to the circumstances. Right, so that's a common and important way people frame this. So you're actually diverting a train towards someone who's not in harm's way, right? Who didn't do anything to be in harm's way.
We earlier were saying that maybe an act of omission is not as difficult or as problematic as an act of commission. But I think there's a lot of people in the world that would not agree with that from a practical standpoint. So if I am somebody who's going to argue this, if I'm somebody who's seen this happen, and there's no Good Samaritan train leader pulling laws
Right.
about
Right.
what I'm going to do, then essentially, instead of letting the natural course of events occur, and there's tragedies every day, I'm trying to pull this up, that
Yes.
then I was actually purposely putting somebody in harm's way by my action causing a problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Letting the natural course of events happen, and I can certainly try to help them after, which would be a kind thing, and but that's the thing to do.
Yes. There's the...
But there's essentially healthcare system.
Yes. Yes, I have to repeat this to the Zoom people.
The idea of taking an action to harm somebody could be seen as much worse than not acting to
I'm going to use Wendy's new framework of a GSLPL. That's a Good Samaritan lever-pulling law. All right? So there's no GSLPL in play here. Yeah, so there is this issue of the agency of the individual and society's judgment about that individual agent. Does that agent have, I don't know, protections or duty or responsibility or something to act? Or I thought this is a very prescient and important point. Or like our current healthcare system, we let the tragedy happen, then we try to fix it, right? But there is something about I could be the harmer in a society where there's no understanding of inaction versus action, and I'm now making an action to send a train to hurt somebody. Right?
I would just add that there is a society perspective on that and judgment, but there's also the internal.
That's right.
I'm not an emergency medicine because I know that I don't jump super fast and super fast going out. So, I think that there are people who
Right.
have disease
Right.
or desires to quickly fix may not be at the same level as others, and that may or may not process with them later as having internal.
That's right. There's the harm to the individual, puller or not puller. There's the proclivity and kind of skills and awareness and inclinations of the puller or not puller, right? And not only do we have this sort of diversity of humankind that might be valued or not less valued, as our current biased society does do, but there's also the diversity of the kind of people who might be the agent to pull or not pull, and how society would view them or how they would view themselves. Did you want to throw in one? Yes, yes. Yes. So currently in the news, there's the issue of I guess police officer or sheriff or person who was at the Parkland high school in Parkland, Florida, where the shooting took place, and this judgment by society or by the locals, people there anyway, of the inaction being a form of culpability, right? And painfully, there's always like circumstances for any time I do this where you can sort of draw upon a current event. Not always that current event, but current events do play here. So these are, the trolley thing is not real, but the kind of way these decisions are judged is real, yeah.
Well, I think part of it also might be like, is it your job if you have training in pulling the lever?
Yeah.
Do you have, are you a mandatory puller?
Yes, excellent. An MP. Are there MPs who activate the LPLs? Yes. 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 The natural course. Thank you for reiterating this. I should have seized upon that too. Yes, this idea of like the deterministic or there's a natural thing happening. When I'm here now, with or without my lever pulling skills, I'm making an action that wasn't the natural course of things, and that does sometimes guide people to choose not to pull.
This is another comment from Amy online. I think this is actually a really interesting parallel. She sort of brings up the idea that if you don't pull the lever, you don't alter fate, and in a way you're not responsible, and she draws a parallel to the mindset of parents who choose to not vaccinate their children.
Yes.
They don't cause harm, even though they are also not protecting them from harm, which I think
yes,
is
excellent.
idea.
Amy, thank you for hopping in. Yes, and I like the current events tied to the measles epidemic and so forth. Right, so yes, this notion of fate is also in play in these kinds of decisions. So now we can do something here, and we must do something at this point. Oh, yes, do.
I guess in the end, I'd like to yell out, do you guys want to live or don't you want to live?
Right.
Because we don't know people that are on the track. Right?
No.
And then this person over here has desperate desire to live because they're on their way somewhere, so it would be nice to know.
Decision-making for others is also one of the things that's happening in the circumstance. We don't know people's views, the would-be victims' views. We don't know who they are. There's all sorts of ways of trying to collect information to do our weighing, or our judging. And the agent has this weighing. There's all sorts of things involving weighing. So who is it? Who is it in philosophy? Does anyone know? Who is this? The good of the many versus the good of the few. Churchill's decision, the way you all voted, right? 5 versus 1. Which philosopher is it that brought us to the Western world? It's okay. We didn't prepare, so you don't have to know this. I just wondered if anyone happens to know. So it's a person who was born in the early 1700s, died in the early 1800s, named Jeremy Bentham. So Jeremy Bentham is sort of the philosopher whose contribution to the Western canon is what's called utilitarianism, the good of the many versus the good of the few. It's ultimately about weighing good, weighing or measuring good. So Bentham is an interesting character. He was strongly attached to University College London, UCL, not too far from where Churchill himself would have been making the same kind of utilitarian decision during the V1 rockets. Bentham actually, again, he died in the early 1800s, is still seated in the lobby of UCL. So if you go to UCL, you can say, I'd like to see Professor Bentham, and he is in a glass case sitting there. It turns out that the British aren't only cheeky when they name missiles, like doodlebugs, but the British are cheeky when they have rival schools doing mischief with other rival schools. So apparently what happened was, Bentham was sort of very self-involved, and he thought, after I die, embalm me, put me in a case on a wheeling chair, and when there are faculty meetings, please wheel me into the meetings, count me as attending, all right, and then wheel me out after meetings. I'm always kind of joining these meetings. I agree. I don't, yeah. I guess. It is preposterous from a medical education or medicine point of view. But it was also preposterous when the rival took Bentham's head off his body. So they actually took his actual embalmed head and stole it. And he was there headless for quite a while. UCL eventually got it back. But they were so horrified by this, they put a wax head, identical to the actual head, on the actual body. So if you go see Bentham now, you're seeing his actual body and a wax head, right? And the real head is saved, is preserved in a vault. So if he's wheeled to meetings, like many of us, he has no head in the meeting, right? He's not, right? So you well done. His body is there, but he's not really there, right? Kind of like the rest of us at meetings. So that's a little German Bentham side gig. All right, so but here's the thing. So Bentham had a kind of philosophy, utilitarianism. I could quiz you on utilitarianism later, but we won't do that. Right now, just hold the idea. Utilitarianism, weighing. It's about weighing the good of the many and the good of the few. The greatest good for the greatest number. The greatest pleasure for the greatest number. Okay, it's weighing. But there are other ways of looking at moral philosophy and moral decision-making. So, for example, there's a trolley going down a track, and there are 5 people on a track, and these 5 people cannot get out of the way. And there's a bridge that goes over the track. And standing on the bridge, seeing this all about to happen, is a very large, heavy-framed, muscular person. A big muscular person, maybe even with a backpack. And that muscular person sees this coming, and you see this coming, so you push the muscular person off the bridge, who then falls onto the track, stopping the train. 1, 5. 1 is killed, 5 survive. So we ought to vote. Push, fall, 1 dies. Pulling the lever, going to the spur, 1 dies. Push, fall, 1 dies, 5 are saved. Same 5. Maybe it's even the same 1. So how many people now would vote to push? Wait. But you guys are the 1-5 crowd. 100% of you, it's like 5 is more than 1. To push the person, used to save the 5. 1 dies, 5 live. So anybody going to push? No one's pushing. So something happened, right? Something. I mean, you were so convinced of your moral reasoning, and then something happened. There were 5-1 is not the decision.
Are these 5 people permanently affixed to the?
Yeah, I don't,
Get out of the way. Are they permanently affixed there?
let's just assume that they're just on the track and they cannot get out of the way in time. They're just torpid humans. Don't get out of the way of trains. Right? Yes. So we're not pushing. So why aren't we pushing? Yeah.
So much more personal in terms of the action. It's very removed to pull a lever. And to actually take a person and kill them feels morally repugnant.
So 2 things, 2 more. So I'll let you can keep going. I just want to make sure I say it to the group. So it feels morally repugnant to push. There's something, proximity, to touch, something like that matters. And you use the language to kill them. But wasn't it killing the person when you turned it to the 1? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're choosing between 2 bad choices. Right?
Yes.
That's what you're facing us with. And trying to figure out which is the action you should take, but both carry with them really bad feelings.
Yeah, very bad choices. Yeah, all bad, very bad feelings either way. But something's different about this pushing than pulling levers. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of people who are really for capital punishment and for punishment of someone who has done heinous crimes, but yet how many people would actually be the ones doing the deed, giving them the injection,
Right, so
lethal injection, or,
yes.
That's different to actually be the one
Yes.
versus sitting back and saying, oh yeah, that person deserves it.
Yes, you bring it to this importantly, this point about where the thrust of this is going. This is the point now of capital punishment, where there's like one might be in favor of it, like sort of when they're asked on a poll or when they're voting or something like this, but themselves may not be the person who would ever like do the act that would cause the death of the other. And it reminds us of these experiments that happened at Yale many, many years ago by a professor named Stanley Milgram. Anyone know this thing? The movie called The 10th Level, where where people were behind. There were 2 people in this experiment. The actor who was acting out as if they were getting harmed when they didn't answer a question correctly. And then the subject of the experiment was someone who was being encouraged by a professor in a white coat, a doctorly person in a white coat, saying, well, they got it wrong. The deal is when they get it wrong, you've got to shock them. And what happened was, with each successive wrong answer, the shock thing would go higher. And on the shock dial, it got towards like dangerous and then deadly, like this red area. And yet, we did agree at this experiment, you'd have to shock them if they got it wrong. And people kept shocking, right? If they knew the person ahead of time, it would be different than if they didn't. If they could see them, it would be different. If they couldn't hear them screaming, it would be different. All of this proximity stuff was in play in this experiment. Right? So humans, when they have more proximity, as each of you is saying, have less inclination, but under the pressure of physicians in white coats, it turns out, they will actually go further. With somebody, yeah.
So I think that if you look at the people that are on the track and the guy who's on the trolley, they made a decision to have, when you get on a trolley, you're going to have a chance of getting in the net.
Yes.
When you stand on the tracks, you're going to have a chance of getting in.
Yes.
But the guy above had nothing to do with making a decision that morning.
Yes, this is it's an important question. So somebody who's on a trolley track might have the risk of being hit. Like that you're kind of walking on trolley tracks, there's something to do with like getting hit. And if someone just walking on a bridge or looking over the edge of a bridge feels like they're quite removed from any, I don't know, responsibility or perceivable risk or something. Now, it's interesting though, but how does that person on the bridge differ from the person on the spur? Because they weren't in front of a trolley, they were on a side track this trolley wasn't going to go on. There are different ways of doing it, but in the original one, there's like 5 on a track and 1 on a side track. Okay, so we're doing something, there's something to do here with like, you're in a lot of harm's way and you should have known. You're maybe in harm's way and you should have known at least a little bit, but a bridge, like you shouldn't have known. But bridge over trolley tracks, it's kind of like it's a bridge over a trolley track after all. Right, so, but we're doing something with this sort of culpability or, I don't know, naturalness, something. This person should get credit, of course, because they weren't just walking across a track, right? They actually went on the bridge. They finally actually obeyed like the proper pedestrian rules and went over the track, which you get extra credit and not get killed because you're not actually, yes. Responsibility meaning of the pusher, of the would-be. Okay, so the question. Well, you see the trolley coming. You see the 5. You're making a calculation in your head. 5-1. So there's something that feels more like the agent is really interceding on this bridge scenario than it was when they're interceding on pulling a lever.
I think it feels very much like a lot of these populations kind of. It's much more. I think it's easier to make decisions when it's theoretical and it feels impersonal.
This. So you raise 2 important questions. So one, again, is about this notion of proximity or the reality versus theory kind of thing, as we were doing with the death penalty example earlier. But there's also, interestingly, and there's another interesting point here, too, that I think, at least I'm reading into this point, this hearkening back to, like, who is the person, like, what is my duty to them, deservedness, there's, like, responsibility. There's something else in the room.
I think something about our value of the person you described is healthy, muscular, strong. Boy, may have some value in society. You said it was a person who's read as an example when was in hospice and 2 months from death or something like that. That may have changed our decisions as well.
Right. So we can't escape the idea. Like we're still doing in our head some of these human proclivities of like rating, judging, valuing, like who is the person, what is their worth, these kind of things. And yet there's still something that made you guys not do the bridge push and do but willing to do the lever push. I think we should never be away from the notion of the risk we have of bias. Of course, it's always sort of in the game. But I'm still kind of wondering, what about this sort of lever pull versus push? Did you have a person on the?
Different though with the bridge. I feel like if you felt compelled to throw somebody's body off the bridge, maybe it should be your own.
Fair enough. So that right. So there. Mm-hmm.
Like you can't throw yourself in front of the train, but if somebody's body has to be in front of the train, like it seems different to push somebody else's body there than you throw your own.
It's a super important point, and fascinating by the fact that nobody offered the idea that you could throw your body in front of the train on the 5-1 pull lever thing. But now when it involves pushing someone off the bridge, all of a sudden this idea of your own sacrifice comes more into play.
I'll sacrifice you, but not me.
Right? Yes. But you see, but it was interesting that this is almost always raised at this moment. It is almost never raised when we're doing the 5-1 lever pull. I'm also fascinated by the issue of, I use muscular and backpack. The reason I use muscular and backpack is because I find hurtful, and I think frankly wrong, to do anything that would suggest about people's body image or obesity or these kind of things. So it turns out in the original way the bridge was written by Judith Jarvis Thomson, an MIT professor of philosophy, it was the fat man. So the fat man was a description of the person on the bridge. Now, there's a couple problems with fat man, besides the fact that it's not kind. It's also illegal to use fat shaming in the UK, where the Oxford Review of Philosophy originally described this experiment, right? That actually would be commensurate to a hate crime in the UK. In spite of that, David Edmonds wrote a book, Would You Kill the Fat Man?, taking a risk of the right to free expression and this hate crime. So he took a risk when he wrote that book. But it comes to your point, too, about like, what if we describe the heavy person differently? Right? What does that do to our decision-making? And yet, there are still a room full of complete pullers to a room full of nobody pushes, right? So how about this? There's a very, let's say, large-bodied person on a bridge overlooking the scene. There's a trolley going down a track. There are 5 people on the track. They cannot get out of the way. There's this bridge. There's this thick-bodied person. And you've got a long pole. And you can just sort of push from way across the bridge and push the person off the track. Anybody using the broom? Anybody using the long pole or the broom? Anybody going to push? We're not proximal anymore. We're not touching the person, smelling the person, knowing their human essence, right? Is anybody going to push with the broom? To the people in the Zoom, there are no converts to pushing with a broom. There's a trolley going down a track. There are 5 people on the track. They cannot get out of the way. There's a bridge over the track, and there's a thick-bodied person on the bridge seeing the scene. You also see the scene. If something doesn't happen, the 5 will die. It turns out that you have a lever in your hand. If you pull the lever, a trap door opens, and the big person falls off the bridge onto the track, stopping the train. In scenario 1 with the spur, there was a lever that you pulled. In scenario 2, there's a lever that you pulled. What's the difference?
What I was actually thinking about is that if there was a lever, would I pull that? And I think the other part of me that is there's like an assurance with when you're on the ground and you're pulling the lever. The train is behind you. You're going to pull the lever. I guess my assumption at the time is I was going to pull the lever, and there would be enough time for the train to derail. I have a concern about my capability of timing either to push the pole or the lever from the bridge to have a thick-bodied person fall.
Okay.
So I think there's something else about the assuredness.
Yes. Super important.
You know, because there is some hope somehow that if you pull a lever and if you're early enough, maybe the harm doesn't occur. So in the back of your mind when you're making the decision, I think there's still that kind of like, is there a third option?
I'm going to go there right now.
The third option is less sure for some reason when you are having a closer proximity, whether it's
Yes. So for some reason, many people will still not pull a lever, like exact same, put you by the side of the track. You pull the lever, the trap door open. You can do the exact same situation for the agent, pulling a lever, and it still feels different. But something feels different about this assuredness notion. It turns out there's a philosopher that would have us consider this notion. You're saying assuredness, but there also has to do with something with intention, right? Like, you need to be that person falls upon the track and saves the 5, right? So how about if we had another Judith Jarvis Thomson, MIT professor of philosophy? What if we had another thing from the mid-'80s where she offered this scenario? It's a little hard to do here without a board, but I can do it. There is a trolley going down a track, and in front of the trolley are 5 people on the track who can't get out of the way. This is like the first thing. And there's a side track with 1 person on the side track on the spur who can't get out of the way, but who's currently not in harm's way. So it's just like the original case, yes? Recognize that as being just like the original case. Except for one thing. That side track loops around and connects to where the 5 are lying. So it's actually like straight, you could go around or side, and you could go around. Now, why does this loop matter? Not just a Y, it actually goes off and then it comes back around. The reason why that matters is if there was nobody on the track and you pulled the lever, the train would go off to the spur and go all the way around and be coming back in the other direction. Or if there was nobody on the track and you didn't pull the lever, it would go straight ahead and go around and come back in the other direction. Either way, the train completes the entire loop. So in that scenario, the trolley's going down the track, and there are 5 people in front of the track, and you pull the lever off to go and hit the 1. So there's an issue of assuredness that comes into play, and an issue of intention that comes into play, which is what happens in the original case. Trolley going down a track, there's 5 people on the track, side track with only 1 person. In the original case, if you pull the lever, and that 1 person says, "What in the world?" and runs away, and they're fine. Are you bummed out? Did anything bad happen? What happened? Did the 5 die? No. Did the one die? How do you feel about yourself? All is well, right? Scenario 2 with the loop. The trolley going down the track, there's 5 people on the track, there's a person on the side track. You pull the lever, and the one person escapes. What happens to the trolley? It goes around and hits the 5. So are you feeling great about that? I mean, you made the decision. You had to go through that angst to make that decision. And what happened in the end? How many died? 5. So why are those different? It has to do with this assuredness thing. But if you think about it, it also has to do with intention. You actually intend for the one to get hit in the loop so that the 5 don't die in the loop. But in the first case, you don't intend, you don't care about, you would love it if the one would escape. You don't intend or need the one to die. This kind of question was a foundational part of moral philosophy as well. I'm going to do that in 1 second. Before we get back to the loop and the intention issue, which is a very, very important moral philosopher, I'll just hint at it that it was another 500 years before Bentham. There's something I'm going to read you that has to do, again, with this, why are we not pushing the heavy-bodied person off the bridge? Why does the proximity matter? Why does the broom not satisfy us? Why does even the trapdoor thing not something in our bellies says no to all that? So I can read you a piece from the great writer Le Guin. All right, so this is Ursula K. Le Guin. Does anybody know Le Guin? Yeah, Le Guin has some brilliant stuff. So Le Guin writes a story called The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas. Anybody know the story? All right, so here's just a quick paragraph from Le Guin's Omelas. And it relates not to this loop, and we'll do the loop again in a second. It relates to this idea of why we're not pushing the person off the bridge, why we're not brooming the person off the bridge, why we don't even like pulling the lever to have the person fall through a trap door off the bridge, why something about that proximity, that closeness, that humanness just feels wrong to us, right? Something violates the 5-1 theory. All right. So in this story, the short story by Le Guin, there's a story about a child. And the way the story unfolds is like this. They all know it is there, referring to the child. They all know it is there. All the people of the town of Omelas. They all know that it has to be there. The child has to be there. They all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the happiness of their children, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on this child's abominable misery. If the child were brought up into the sunlight, out of the vile place, if the child were cleaned and fed and comforted, it would be a good thing indeed. But if that were done, on that day and in that hour, all the prosperity and beauty and the delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed. Those are the terms. The story is basically that there's a child chained to a wall in a cold, wet, damp, windowless room below the city of Omelas. The child has to be there in wretched misery. If the child is there in wretched misery, why? Why they have to be in wretched misery? Because the entire beauty, glory, peace, tranquility, health, well-being of the town above is preserved by having the child below. No pestilence, war, or famine, right? So the one person is suffering so horribly, this child, for all the population of the city to have essentially utopia. How do we feel about that? That's the many and the one. Right. I mean, what's your sense? Yeah, that doesn't feel right? I'm not saying, what would you do? I'm just saying that, how do we feel about that? It feels like it's not right? Do others also have this? It feels kind of like, not just the pediatricians, but the rest of us do, right? Does anybody feel like, I don't know, the whole city has no pestilence, war, or famine. It's a complete utopia. Maybe it's worth it. Yeah. Right. There's something. Would we agree at this point at least that Bentham's idea that all is measurable and all is able to be evaluated, and then you weigh more against less, do all that kind of calculation, there's something not quite fully satisfying about that pushing the person off the bridge didn't feel right. The child down there for most of us doesn't feel quite right. Have you guys ever heard the ticking time bomb one? The story was much better before, strange bombs were going off in cities. But the philosophical question of a ticking time bomb is you've captured a bad person who knows where the bomb is. If the bomb goes off, an entire city is going to be destroyed. So do you torture the person to find out where the bomb is? This is like one of these questions of whether torture is okay. So it turns out Americans are different than most other societies in this regard, but even in general, Americans think, I don't know, torturing the person may not be the way to go, but there are these people who are in harm's way. But watch. What if you caught the partner of the bad person? Partner had nothing to do with it at all, didn't even know about it. Would you torture the partner of the bad person to have them beg the bad person to say where the bomb is? What if you're the child of the bad person? Because this is more like O'Malley's. Would you torture the child to have the bad person reveal, right? At some point, we're like, we don't do that. So something about the one still holds power for us, even compared to the many, which means Bentham's moral philosophy is breaking down for us, right? Whose philosophy is it that these stories aren't from this great philosopher, but whose philosophy is it that says about the inherent rightness, feeling, something's not quite right about this? There's something universally no, we don't do that. This is a Prussian person in Königsberg, Prussia, late 1700s. The great Western philosopher Immanuel Kant had us consider about duty and the inherent rightness. Kantian philosophy is often known as deontological. But deontological philosophy is like kind of, in essence, made manifest for us by this. We don't want to push off the bridge. We don't even want to sweep off the bridge. We don't want to leave the child in wretched misery. We don't want to torture the child of the person who knows the bomb. Something is inherently wrong about that to us. So just to know, it's another kind of moral philosophy that essentially is in competition with or juxtaposed with Bentham and the utilitarian weighing. Let me just do one last one before we stop. What is about this intention thing, this loop? We needed the person to get hit in the loop. What is that? Do you know who it is? Yes. So consequential is complicated because it can be played out in many different modes of philosophy. It can be looked at as consequential. It's true, and this would be kind of an example. But if we get specifically to the idea of intentionality having moral weight, right? There's a very important philosopher who 499 years before Kant was born was thinking about intention. Now, this is an important moral philosopher who was raised in a family where the parents had a very strong idea in Italy. You are going to be a Benedictine monk. You're going to go up into this place in the hills. You are not going to come. You're going to think and learn about faith your entire life away from society. That's what you're going to do. And this young person said, no. Instead, I'm going to run away and become a Dominican monk or a Dominican Catholic practitioner, and I'm actually going to engage the world and try to do good things. This person became stunningly learned over the course of his life and a stunningly sort of good do-gooder, and went off and thought a lot about philosophy. And so it's important both as a Western civilization philosopher, also as a Catholic theologian. So this is Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas had us consider the notions of intentionality as having moral weight. A classic example is Aquinas' doctrine of double effect. So that's the DDE. What is that? That's the idea of so-called collateral damage. So watch. If you were going to, if you were going to do something that's potentially harmful, knowing, intending that it could also hurt others who are not in harm's way, right? He would consider that to be morally corrupt, that you don't do that. You don't hurt people knowingly. If you're going to do something that was potentially harmful to people not in harm's way, but you would wish nothing would happen to them, so the collateral damage, you intend not to have any of them hurt, but it's foreseeable that it could be, but it's not intended, right? That would be sort of animating his views. This is often posed in just war theory, this idea that having a war to protect a nation, to do good things is right. You would never want to kill any civilians, but civilians may get hurt. It's foreseeable. Aquinas. All right, we don't have to go into much more philosophy, but just to give you an idea, we've done at least three philosophers: utilitarianism, Bentham, this weighing thing. We've done deontologic reasoning, Kant. Something feels inherently wrong about that. That doesn't hold the human core, the human essence, as having moral valence. Kant is all about what we now call in medicine and the related health professions the value of autonomy, right? Each human is a full being, a whole universe unto themselves. So pushing even one doesn't feel right? Then we have this sort of notion of intentionality. That which is foreseeable but not intended is different than that which is foreseeable and intended. That's why the loop comes into play. Three philosophers, three fields, three important fields. We didn't do Aristotle, we didn't do Mill, we didn't do Locke, we didn't do Rawls, we didn't do a lot of things, but we did do a lot of philosophy. So are we feeling a little philosophically warmed up? All right. Were you able to watch pedagogy at all and be a participant and not be focusing on sort of things that were too clinical? Because the whole point I wanted to do with me doing it. Was it perfect? It was not. But we should dissect it now. And let me just do a couple. Any more questions about philosophy or about the exercise before I? Yeah.
I kept thinking about the semi-driver that recently plowed into a bunch of cars.
Oh.
Car freeway.
Oh, I don't know this. Yeah.
About that, but I guess there was an off-ramp that there was one car there, and he didn't take the off-ramp. And I would imagine unintentionally he was going straight and plowing into multiple cars, and it was a big fiery explosion.
Oh no.
Many people died.
Oh no.
That's what I kept thinking of. You're not going to intentionally go hit that one person.
Right. I did not know about this, and it does feel kind of like the spur. I think what's interesting for me is that, like, I think for all of us, I mean, there's another reason to do philosophy, which is philosophy, especially if it's sort of brought to us in simply and not too like sort of pedantically and inaccessibly, does I think help us in real life clinical situations, at least to pause for a second and say like what principle, like why do I feel this way? You know, it turns out our brains are very interesting. I could do one little neuroscience thing. Any neuroscientists in the room? Okay, then I'm safer than usual. All right, then. But it's kind of interesting. So the Bentham type of reasoning happens in our prefrontal cortex, the tip of our brain. And the more Kantian, sort of doesn't feel quite right, this gut feeling thing, happens in the medial temporal lobe, so just sort of on the inside of the temporal lobe. What's interesting about this, very interesting to me about this, is if you take our brains, it turns out the reason why our head, I have a pretty long head, I realize it's not good, but most of us have pretty nice round heads. And if you have a nice round head, what happened was human beings would not have been able to be upright if our brains continued to grow linearly. Like our skulls have been quite tall, and our necks couldn't hold that skull up. That would have pulled us down, right? So we still would have been on all fours. In order to be upright, we had to have a more ball on top of our neck. So our brains actually rolled into like a ball. So the prefrontal cortex, that part that does the weighing and measuring and does calculation, moral reasoning, more like Bentham, is rolled underneath, right? The temporal lobe is here on the side, and it's closed like that. So the underneath tip, the Bentham, is against the Kantian gut feeling. Or with one of the great sort of Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economists, Kahneman and Tversky wrote in the sort of Systems 1 and Systems 2 Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow book, right, sort of similar notions of how the brain works. But anyway, put that underneath, put the side on, it means that they're very close together in our brains, right? And things that fire together, wire together, and things that wire together, fire together, which means we're supposed to do both. We're supposed to do cognitive reasoning, and we're supposed to have this gut feeling. We're supposed to actually go through that work. So I liked when we were bringing up these kind of issues that are transferable to medicine, because we're supposed to use tips of our brains and the sides of our brains at once to decide like how we morally reason. That is a quick ride through moral philosophy. All right, everybody okay, or we're still friends, or yeah?
You have to write with your and how it would be different in different.
Absolutely right.
If we were a SEAL team.
Yes.
Totally would have put that guy, like not right. Or I'm just saying, in emergency disaster situation.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh no, black. Oh, here we go. If I take too much time with you, I can't get to you.
Super important.
It was just interesting to me.
Yes.
I was a Navy SEAL.
Yes.
But right, like I think I probably would have pushed without having like
Fascinating.
training you go through.
It matters. The training matters enormously, and the different audiences have different kinds of ways in which they approach this. It turns out, yes, doctors and teachers and stuff, we have kind of one way which is different than maybe firefighters and people in the military. It turns out it's usually sort of 80-20 on the opening round, and then it switches around. It's never a majority in the push. So it's 80-20 with the yes, I lever, and people will go on the sidetrack, but if you do the push the person, it always switches towards the majority being on the they've done it for thousands and thousands of people, sometimes on computers, and they keep showing the same effect. I've never been in a 100-0 room before. But because you mentioned it, let's just do one more. So there's a mountain in Afghanistan, true story. Maybe some of you saw the movie. There's a mountain in Afghanistan, and Officer Marcus Luttrell is on this mountain. So he is part of a SEAL team. So he's on a SEAL team with 3 other buddies. And what their plan is to do, what the plan is to do is that they know there's a sort of, from the U.S.'s point of view, I just want to be respectful, there's multiple points of view about this. From the U.S.'s point of view, there is like a very, very bad actor down in the village below. So they're in these black bodysuits, very lightly armed, up on the hillside. They're creeping over the hill. They're going to go over the hill, eliminate the target, to use their language, of the very, very bad person, and sneak out and be gone. So they're on the hill that's all about to go. It's early in the morning, and they hear this bing, 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 bing. They look around, and there's a bunch of sheep coming over. Not sheep, goats coming over the hill. And some of the goats have little bells on them. That's the sound. That's the binging that we're hearing. So the goats, and over the hill with the goats comes the goat herder. So the goat herder is just some regular Afghani citizen who herds goats. And they grab the goat herder, and they hold the goat herder down. Now, they don't have any rope or anything. They don't have anything, right? They have light weapons with silencers, but they don't have anything else. And a little discussion breaks out on the hillside. You got to kill the goat herder. He'll go down in the village. He'll tell them that we're here. We don't have enough. We can't defend ourselves against a whole village. This will be the end of us. You can't kill the goat herder. Like, we're in Afghanistan to protect the civilians of Afghanistan. Like, we have a moral cause. We're here to help goat herders. What are you talking about, right? We're not here to help goat herders. We're here to make sure that we get the mission done. No. The mission is ultimately about protecting the people of Afghanistan from tyranny. We can't be people who kill goat herders randomly on hillsides. Back and forth. They go quickly in the night. They decide, they're U.S. service people after all, they decide to vote. One vote, kill the goat herder. One vote, you cannot kill the goat herder. One vote, I abstain. Ha. So Luttrell has the last vote. And Luttrell votes. Anybody see the movie or read about it? Luttrell votes, let him go. They let him go. They continue with their mission a little bit, and the next thing that happens is the entire village is on them, and they're under incredible siege. Right? So what they do, according to the protocol as military SEAL team, as you were suggesting, is they call in for support. And a Black Hawk helicopter is shot down and 16 die. And a second copter comes and people are injured in that. And all his buddies, the other 3, are killed. And Luttrell takes a blow and he rolls down the hill and lives, but is dying. So there's an incredible painful irony to this. So he's swept up by a woman from the village who protects him until the Americans can get him out, where he's flown to Germany and he ultimately lives. So the goat herder went and told the village, but the woman in the village protected the U.S. service person, right? But he had a who shall live, who shall die scenario about the goat herder, but also about his team, and lost so many people as a consequence of letting the goat herder go. So just to say, SEAL teams do think about these things. Like, it's chilling, right? I want to say one more thing. I use language to not impugn people from Afghanistan or the U.S. service people. My family is loaded with military. I just wanted to sort of, I was born on an Air Force base. My dad was in the Air Force. My grandma's 2 brothers were in the Army Air. My uncle was in the Navy. My grandpa was in the Army. And so I don't want to be judged on my military views. I just want to pose this in a plain spoken way. But the point I'm also trying to raise is we in medicine, in emergency departments or in pediatric clinics or with chemo or not, we are faced with decisions. It's not just in medicine. For all the health professions, there's financing of these things. How much do we activate ourselves and advocate at state government? How do we vote? What do we write about? So we have sort of power over these things. I just wanted to throw into the room that it's still, we still have the possibility of engaging in such important decisions. But that's not the topic of the day. The topic of the day is active pedagogy. All right. So that was where we are. Boop. So let's just break it down for a second, and then, because the point of this was, moral philosophy is fun for me, obviously, but that's not the point. The analysis of the exercise. So in this exercise, learning flows from thoughtful and rigorous inquiry with others, asking questions to set up answers, and people address each other. Teachers act as conductors. I'm not trying to be cute about trained conductors, but I was thinking more like orchestral conductors. But by this, what does that mean? It means you're informed, you know the subject, but ultimately you're just a planful guide. Again, think about a symphony, how the conductor is sort of planfully guiding the symphony, the musicians through the symphony. Notice it's not teachers act as tellers. Teachers act as speech makers. Right? You can do some degree of telling, but you want to have this sort of activated classroom be that the participants are doing the learning, which means the learners are the loci of learning. Right? The learners are the place where the learning happens. So therefore, the learners are are the loci of the action. Right? So if the learners are to be doing the learning, the learners should be doing the activity. Yes, you as a conductor are helping the activity take place, But it's not really you doing the activity and them sitting. It's you helping them be in the activity. And nearly everybody in the room spoke, right? All right, we'll just do a little more analysis. What was the process exactly? Well, the teacher creates a directed discourse among the learners, right? That's what the person in the front of the room is doing. And the directed discourse, what are the learners supposed to do? They're going to uncover. You're going to try to find out what they know, what they think, have them clarify it, sort of give the principle that underpins it, like when I went back to you a second time, right? And expand their knowledge, go forward into areas they maybe hadn't known of or hadn't thought of. So uncover, clarify, expand, which I'm going to say several times to you today. So those are called talk moves. Just to be clear, uncover, clarify, expand are the talk moves. And one kind of cute little way that you can hold on to these notions of the 3 talk moves is this, right? You want to put these things to use. I'm not spelling use correctly, but, right? But in the classroom, you put the talk moves to use, U-C-E. Uncover, clarify, expand. Now, we're going to, in a moment here, I'm just going to give you the list of, like, what would uncover questions look like? What's the actual thing the teacher says? What's a clarify move look like? What's the thing a person would say to clarify, have the classroom clarify? What would the expand prompts be from a teacher? All right, so what do learners have to do typically? Now, again, in this class, obviously, we weren't going to have you prepare any philosophy ahead of time, and you might have read from the books, but it didn't matter, I think you see. I think in medical education, in health professions education, like we're going to have our learners know something, typically before these conversations take place. But anyway, the learner needs to prepare, practice, and participate. Now, those are sort of simple little P's to hold on to, but I'm going to break them out for a second. So prepare. You must prepare the prescribed. So I say, look, guys, I need you all to read chapters 1 through 6 of this and the first chapter of that. So that's what I'm sort of prescribing. Please do this that I'm telling you in preparation. Right? But there's another kind of preparation, and we forget, I think we, to our peril, don't do the second type so often with our learners. They also have to prepare the predictable. So I might not say something that you ought to prepare, but wouldn't it be great if the learners had a sense, like, how's the session likely to go? Like, I know what it's about, what are the kind of questions they may ask. If they knew how the classroom was going to function in this kind of Socratic way, they would want to have some degree of, like, imagining the kind of questions that might be asked. I don't tell them what's going to be asked, but they should do the work of trying to imagine where it would go, right? That's an extremely important habit of mind for preparation. It still remains an important habit of mind for us. Right? If we're, take the boards again, we can do a lot of study questions. We should also think about the kind of domains that are more likely to be asked, right? Anything. What's the kind of prescribable and predictable things? Practice also has things to think about. So when you practice, you should self-interrogate, right? Do I understand that? Let me see. Like, I guess what that really means is, so you're just doing the work of kind of seeing whether I know what I think I know. We talked about this a bit yesterday with this sort of self-quizzing. You have to imagine what ifs. So I could be asked this, I could be asked that. What if the teacher said, framed it this way? What else am I missing? Kind of just setting up for, again, the things that you aren't told to study, but you might want to just reach, kind of extend yourself to think what could be important, what could be in the classroom. But think about it for patient care. What could our patient need? You don't always have to have them ask you. You might think you're asking questions that they might not themselves have thought of. For skill building issues, right, if you're trying to have a person prepare for skills, they have to actually do the skills. Now, so you imagine if someone's going to go play soccer, right, they may start by just dribbling in their backyard. That's how you can begin with a heuristic. That is to say, a chunk or a small frame, just a bit. A simulation is a heuristic. Like just doing something. If you want to become a wrestler, you might just do a lot of rope climbing because it makes your wrists strong, which wrestlers need. Right? You do heuristics only if needed. If you already have gone beyond the chunking, the more important thing to do is to do things in context. By the way, skills and content can be practiced in context. Content practiced in context? What does that mean? It means when you think about the application of content as opposed to cocktail party content, right? So the dean here, she is an expert in infectious diseases, right? You can imagine that I could say, like, I'm going to meet this great dean. So I'm going to try to brush up on some of the microbiology just so I can throw a few jokes out there, right? And there's never a bad time for like a Q fever joke I was saying last night because, Coxiella burnetii, right? Right. Corynebacterium, ha, right? And so she thinks I'm smart. That's cocktail party knowledge. I'm not really practicing on a patient, right? I can throw all sorts of cool facts out there. You want to hear about University of Virginia's basketball team, who won the national championship, where I went to med school? I can tell you all sorts of facts about them. I can't play basketball at all, right? And I couldn't use the kind of knowledge of this team in any kind of practical way. It's more like the kind of cool thing you say to your buddy after they win. So it's much more important to think of skill and content as transferable, translatable, in practice, in context. Finally, this notion of practice how you're going to play. That's what when we say in context. You do the actual doing as if you were doing it in real time. And finally, participation, and there's two little notions here. One is, if you're in this room doing the activity which we just did, right, you don't have to necessarily answer the question. Like, different people could be the answerers. But if you're on the sideline, you should at least imagine, like, well, what do I think? So like, at one point, Wendy said, yeah, I was kind of thinking that about, right, you posed I was thinking, right? So even if we're not doing the answering, we should still do the cognitive work of imagining how I might answer, right? So you can imagine in a surgical case, I'm hoping those students are kind of doing the anatomy in their head even when you're not asking specific questions, right? Or maybe they know a lot about that patient and what brought her to the breast surgery, even if you're not going to ask all those things of them, right? Right, and so other people should be kind of imagining or ready, even if they've not yet been asked, exactly. And then there's, of course, the, like, getting in there. You gotta be ready to jump in, and be ready to jump in whether you're right or wrong. There was really no wrong in our room. We were just saying the gut principles that underpinned our thoughts. But in some cases, there really are right or wrong answers, and you gotta be happy to jump in whether you're gonna be right or wrong, because being right or being wrong is a win. Because students learn to be nourished by the process, doing the hard work, engaging, just as we spoke about yesterday, this Carol Dweck work of being nourished by process and not only fearing being found out or having the right answer is the only important thing. No, hopping in is part of it, right? All right. How do we make these things happen? Well, there's a designer and there's a facilitator. So the designer basically is the person who creates the scenarios. The facilitator is the person who uses these talk moves. But clearly, you can be both the designer and the facilitator. But in case you're not, let me at least parse the two. All right. So, the operational requirements. To create the scenarios, all right, you must have some objectives you want to get through. Can anybody guess my objectives for that? I mean, the macro objective was to watch some meatball teach you and see if you can find strengths and weaknesses in his teaching, and then we can use that to break it down. But if this were a philosophy class, what might have been the objectives of that session?
To understand the three different philosophies and philosophers.
Right. Right, to practice and come to understand a little bit about these three philosophers and their philosophies, right? That would be sort of an outcome-y kind of, absolutely an outcome-y kind of objective. Was there a process objective? Right, to transfer or be about or engage their personal views or engage current events on the highway or, I don't know, the debate for death penalty, whatever, to sort of connect, engage, connect it to person. Yeah, so we could do several others, but those are the kind of objectives you might have had. And what you also need to create is a controversy with choices, because it generates the debate, obviously, you saw that. And it's got to be perturbable, which means in real time, based on what you say, I have to be able to go somewhere and change it, right? But part of why I went into the SEAL team thing was that you offered it, so I wanted to show that I was sort of ready for the military one, right? Because I was doing what ifs in my head. What if they raise that? What if they raise that? I even do the what if from if there was somebody in the room who served in the U.S. Armed Forces. I want to be sure that when I say from the U.S.'s point of view a bad actor, as opposed to it's a bad actor, right? Because that could be insulting to someone who sort of sees it. So you have to sort of have these what ifs ready and be ready to change and flex and go with where the crowd goes. The talk moves, again, are the three talk moves, which I'm going to get into in a moment. So for the designer and the facilitator, that's the two ideas. I just want to show one more thing about the designer here. So these have specific, I just mentioned infectious diseases, and here you are. That's perfect. That was perfect. The scenarios. Yes. I said how I couldn't resist mentioning Q fever last night at our dinner. For the designer, you've got to consider the pathways the audience may go. You've got to really think hard about the kind of ways the audience might answer. By the way, it's a large part of the fun of making these is trying to imagine all the ways the audience might go. You've got to create controversies, but you create them not for controversy's sake. It's because it allows for probing, and the probing allows for teaching. And you've got to practice beforehand. So I can't even tell you the number of times I've practiced this in my house, my poor children. If I say the word trolley going down a track to my children, they will run, right? They've heard it so many times. But I also practice with many different audiences too, and I, sometimes I do it better, sometimes I do it worse, but I try to learn from the previous time I tried. All right, so back to these talk moves for the facilitator for a second. So the talk moves, it's kind of easy to say, UCE, use, talk moves, but let's actually show what the kind of language they might be. It's just annoying to not show examples, right? So here's some talk moves. For uncover, you could have a vote. Who thinks this and who thinks that, right? You usually follow an uncover move with something like why, or what's the principle that underpins that, right? Or can you give an example? Uncovering often tries to generate another question, but you see, like the vote got us into our first go at this. If the vote had been, let's say, 80-20, like it often is, 80% of people say pull the lever, and 20% of people say, no, it just doesn't feel right, don't pull the lever. What would my... Right, it's a tell about that, but who should I have chosen? Should I have chosen the 80 or the 20? So let's just say it were that like everybody voted to pull the lever except for you three. So what would my next move after the vote? Agreed. You turn to the minority group and let them go first, because they get to have the opening safe space. And you often want to return to them because you've got to recognize they're in the outnumbered group, right? So you got to be sort of you got to predict that they may need some support. You're not because you don't want to be perceived as setting them up for the real answer. Like, what's your reason? What's your reason? Yeah. Okay, now let's go. Okay, that's ridiculous, right? That'd be a hamster, right? So you don't want to do that. So you do start with to give the power to the people who are in the fewer number, but you also have this sort of constant sense of not having them feel like they were just. So we usually do a couple people in that group first. So these are uncover moves. Clarify talk moves are more like these. Tell me more, just as you said a moment ago. Tell me more what you mean about what's the principle that drives your answer or underpins your answer. So are you saying? And you just like let's put. Are you saying that it's different, and you think in a military audience? And I just don't say anything. And you might just say yes, and then I might say yeah, or you can even direct it like. So clarify me. You can clarify me for the exact difference between maybe a military audience and a medical audience, right? So you're putting it back. After all, it's not about you. You are the conductor of this, right? You're the guide who's taking the people on a journey to get through your objectives. For expanding knowledge, what are other possibilities you're considering? Or you could do this. You could say like, all right, so Jennifer said this. So what do you think about that? Right, so you turn to somebody else and you set up. Right? I mean, if I understood you correctly with your last comment, that's different than this. It's good to set up a debate between them, so it keeps you out, but it also generates good discourse in the crowd, because part of what you're trying to avoid, and I think if I'm critiquing myself right now, I did not do this well today. You're trying to avoid the you speak, I speak, you speak, I speak, you speak, I speak thing. It's ideal if you can do you speak, you, me, you, right?
One of the key things is reading the nonverbal of the room too.
So,
I mean, so when you go over here and say, well, what do you guys think? And you say, okay, Deb's going to answer that. She's looking like this. And that's really, you never want to punt someone. And if you go like this.
right.
That's sort of, you do it naturally, but it is you can tell when you ask the question, you're going to answer just by looking at the faces. I'm glad you raised this, because it's extremely important to raise this idea of the teacher should be reading the nonverbal clues in the room, or cues in the room. It is interesting, right? Because on one hand, you might choose those who are most bright, like bright face, like looking at you like, Aunt, call me. But you also might consider someone who is likely to have a good answer, or someone you've known from before, but maybe who's more quiet, and you could do it in a questioning way. Like, Wendy, do you want to answer that, or do you feel like you have something to say about that? Kind of in a very much like the answer no is okay, right? So it's not like, Wendy, what do you think about that? Which would be more of a cold call. If you're going to have cold call classrooms, they need to be very carefully set up for have a culture that. Right, yeah, right. Maybe a little
Right, right, exactly. Your point is so important, this reading point, yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about the uncovered? So I teach a lot of very heavily weighted topics like racism,
Yes, yes,
policy,
yes.
very, especially in the current society,
Oh, yes.
very challenging in terms of we have a lot of different groups of students who feel marginalized, whether they're on the conservative side or
Yes.
the arent side or whatever side they're on within a minority. How do you negotiate
Yes.
that?
Right, because they're uncover in part could create a public scene. For example, you could say, let's vote, right? But there are certain kind of topics where how to say this, where let me see, if I'm sort of sitting here like, I'm kind of watching the room, I'm realizing, gosh, this is a little complex here. You know, I don't know, some topics are obviously complex at the start, but some are not. Some I'm kind of just noticing, having a complexity moment. You could do a vote which is invisible. So I'm going to have everybody put their hand and just please vote 1 if you think X and vote 2 if you think Y, right? Remember, getting a vote commitment still causes the learner to have to sort of weigh in, right? And then you could have this sort of, would anybody want to open with either position? You can sort of make it where you're not the one noticing or calling out who voted for what, but you're still allowing people to make a commitment. Same thing with a lot of these, obviously, much more technical ways where people are voting and the bar graphs are appearing on the screen or the pie graph is forming or different answers are being listed down. There's obviously all sorts of new med tech or ed tech stuff. But I do want to hold out for the idea that you don't want to make public or exposed people who are not ready to make public or expose their view. And the cold call possibility in complex topics is quite different. So let's give an example of that. I'll make a very complicated example that did happen at Harvard Medical School. There was a classroom where these issues of the day were deeply penetrated into the classroom and people were feeling safe on all sides. So the classroom wasn't going well, in spite of the most wonderful teachers. And it came down that faculty ended up offline grabbing a series of other faculty to say, we're frozen in the class. We're completely frozen. And the other faculty said, what do you mean you're frozen? And they said, if we call on underrepresented communities, they feel picked on. But if we don't call on underrepresented communities, they feel excluded. Now, please understand me. I'm not judging that interpretation by those communities to be wrong, or like, oh, I'm not rolling my eyes at that. I'm commenting on the teacher's problem, right? Not the recipient's legitimate views, right? So, like, what would a teacher do? They don't want to leave people out. They don't want to put people in when they're not ready, right? They don't want to have their own unconscious biases affect the classroom ideally at all, right? And they want to have high regard for whatever conversation. So I always want to acknowledge your question is extremely important and very, very complex in its own right. And I guess the simplest answer is that it's hard to go backwards from an error in that domain or in those domains. It's better to have sort of the subtlety, I think, or the less exposed be a guiding principle, even if it somewhat undercuts the pedagogy. Or even if people write down their vote or write down their feelings about something. So it's not necessarily, you're animating the classroom because they're doing something, but you're not exposing the classroom. Does that make sense? That's a very good one. Yeah, so what do you think about Y's argument? That's not the kind of thing you can necessarily do in a topic like that. But what would you say about so-and-so's argument, right? How is your idea different than Z? Again, that great for so many discussions, perhaps not great for those more human, personal ones. So there are many talk moves. You can make up your own talk moves, but you get the idea, at least the difference among uncover, clarify, and expand. That's the point. All right. Now, Gesundheit. Salud. All right. We can do a practice. Yep, we can do it. Perfect. It'll take us 10 minutes. All right. The way to do the practice is this. We do this very quickly if we're going to end at a quarter of. It's fun for people sometimes to think about making up their own scenario, right? Like, so I work in a women's health center. So a very common, like almost like forgive me, this is a whisper modest, but just an everyday scenario would be something like, a 24-year-old female comes in with a 4-day history of irregular bleeding, or something like that. So it's just a simple scenario. But I will tell you, much like the trolley example, you can go a very long way on that if you're able to perturb in ways that get you to learning objectives. So let me just quickly do that one. I'll try to see if I can do this in 60 seconds. To my student, Yeah, so a patient comes in or the student says, it doesn't matter who starts it. The student could say it to me, I could say it to them. Patient comes in, a 24-year-old with a 3-day history of irregular bleeding. So I could turn and say, okay, so tell me, how do you understand irregular bleeding? What's your framework? They could offer a framework. And the framework might be right or wrong, but it's some framework that allows me then to kind of go somewhere, just like we were going somewhere in our. So they say, I don't know, 24 years old, it's young, there's like much less risk of cancer, and I don't know, I guess I worry about infectious diseases. And I say, well, wait, but how about this expression, irregular bleeding? What does that even, like, what kind of irregular bleeding could somebody have? Oh, I guess it could be the timing, I suppose, or it could be like just too much but it's regular. They can start to pose ideas. I go, okay, so in this patient's case, which one was it? Or what historically, what do we call those? Or what's the difference? Anyway, you can go wherever you need to go to get the learner to go down a path of learning that is the objective that you have. Let's say this learner knows a lot. They could say, oh, oh, sorry, Dr. Hirsh, I'm so sorry. It's very regular. I think normally it would be called menorrhagia because it's like regular and during the period. I might say, well, what's menorrhagia? And she said, well, it's 9 days. And it's, So anyway, just making sure that I'm uncovering as we go. And then finally I could say, okay, before we go any further, just a second, what if the patient were 48? So it's a big perturbation. They're not 48, but you can perturb it, right? And then you see if they have a different understanding of the differential in that case. I'm just trying to give an example of something that you might want to do now with your buddy. So here's what we should do. You will, let's do this probably for 5 minutes. Let's probably see if we can take 3-4 minutes. We'll do this. Just quick. Create some scenario, some provocative sentence, some little teaching nugget you want to do with somebody. Because I want to try to show you that you can do these animated classroom things even one-on-one, right? Have some objective you want to get across, or a couple objectives. Think of something that has a controversy with choices. Be ready to bend and shape it to make those objectives be manifest. Consider some of these pathways, and then you can use these controversies to probe and teach. Because if you want to, we could do a little teach-in here for the last 5 minutes. So just as a teaching point, good scenarios don't always have clear-cut right and wrong answers. It's okay if they do, but they don't always, right? But the main point is they should foster wondering and probing and challenging, right? Because the right answers can be attained outside of the class. They can go read about X, Y, or Z. Good scenarios often have multiple answers, and they generate consideration about the relative strength of them. Like, is anything really ever off a differential diagnosis, or is it just really, really low as a likelihood, right? So that's what we will do just for, like, if you think take 3 minutes to grab a buddy and just sort of think of a quick one with your buddy. All right, 1, 2, 3, 3 minutes, though, quick, and I'll come back. And those on the Zoom, you can do it yourself, or just ponder a scenario. Are you guys all set? Can I interrupt you guys just to say, are you guys good with like having scenarios pretty ready? Yes? Hello? Are you pretty good for having scenarios ready? Because we can do a quick round of practice if you want to. You guys good? So I put another screen up just for, this is the second to last screen. If we want, we can probably do this. We have the time. If you want to, we could have one of you be the teacher, or one of you be the querier, right? The one who asks the questions, and one of you be the learner. And typically, the way it often works just easily is the teacher says, like I just did, here's the scenario, and then they ask the learner a question, and the learner responds. And then you, as a teacher, try to use talk moves with them to go towards your objectives or to practice perturbing the scenario. It doesn't matter if your buddy is not in the same field as you. Just pick something kind of generic. But it's good to I think it's good, audiences have liked the chance to just try a few of the talk moves, because even though they're not complex or like hard to understand, it's sometimes hard to like get practiced in using them fluidly while doing a one-on-one kind of animating the classroom. So people have said, like, can we just have a few minutes to try them out? So does this make sense how you would do this with your buddy or buddies? You can do one-on-two. And I'll just put back up the talk moves so you can actually try the very talk moves. Is that fair? Does that make sense? One teacher, one learner. Teacher poses the thing. Teacher starts with the questions. Learner acts out like they're a learner. All right? All right, here we go. There's the talk moves right there. All right, we'll do that. We'll just go 5 minutes, a little 5-minute run through, and then there's one last slide. Right, all right. And obviously we can practice these in perpetuity with our friends and animals and students. I thought I would just do one last final reflection and then show you the last slide. So how did that feel? Was it kind of interesting to try these sort of notions of talk moves and this idea of perturbing? It's quite fun as a teacher. So hence philosophy and joy. But I will say, like, if I'm critiquing myself, and you guys could critique me too. My thought is, I think there are several things. One is I was partially interrupting at times, as opposed to patiently waiting. I think because I was under pressure to make sure the Zoom people heard what was being said. So maybe a better setup if we had more mics, like mics on the tables or something. I mean, I blame myself for being interrupted. I'm not blaming the setup, but just reflecting on the fact that I was kind of like, okay, trying to get it done so I could say something. I think I definitely leaned to this side more because Jenny, you pointed over there because I was missing that side, right? So this idea of don't be too right-handed or left-handed, right? I think I did. I'm very attentive to the idea that you want to have a mix of people, but also historically in these groups, males always get more airtime than females. But I think we did a good job of mixing that up, so I feel okay about that. I think I summarized okay, although a few times I think I was a little bit too wordy or it was too much me. I should have summarized with shorter little salvos, because again, you were trying to keep it off yourself. I'm certain that I did too much of you, me, you, me, you, me, you, me, and not enough you, right? Were there other things that anyone noticed that were good or would have been better? What do you think? I'm totally game for improvements, yeah.
I appreciated at the end that you summarized the different philosophers. I think that's really important that we're not just having people explore the space, but summarize the concrete learning points. And then I want to give you latitude, so maybe it's coming up, but also that way of helping our learners debrief for themselves,
Yes.
especially when it's a clinical reasoning case. What is the correct conceptualization?
Yes.
Mostly correct or...
Yes, good one.
Like, how is our practice actually done?
Right, thank you. Yes, this is very important. Like, you can't just it can't be just the joy of the ride and not have some point at the end that's explicit. Because some people might get the feeling they might just get it as they go, but many, many will not. So the summary matters, and kind of, even if it's not a, quote, right answer, you can make a right framework, saying like, so it's very important that you consider the different kinds of irregular bleeding, and I'm going to have you, before next session, please read about A and B, and we'll talk about it next time. Like, even if you don't even answer it, you're kind of saying this, irregular bleeding is an important topic, and here's 2 zones of it that you want to go learn about, to set up for there is something to be held. And the third thing I understood you to say is, they also have to kind of, at some point, know, like, how well did I do, like, was I kind of close? And I think that is important, and you might have to decide whether it's like in real time or after a few weeks, but at some point people have to have a sense of how they did. Nobody will do well learning if they're in the sort of vague space of, so am I going the right direction or not? So it's just how much in any real-time moment do you do? So I think that was important that when you said X, Y, and Z, that areas that I'm not quite sure are yet accomplished are these. So why don't we work on those for next week? Something like that. That's a great one, yeah.
I also appreciate that you started off with a story. Which we kind of came back to a couple of times, but it gave us something tangible and relevant. So we didn't just immediately start with this kind of abstract theory of trolley. Maybe this could happen, maybe we wouldn't.
Yes.
We had a very concrete example.
Yeah, some people really love abstraction, but most do not like starting there, for sure. So people often don't like abstraction, but if you're even, like whoever we are, you can't just sort of hop in. So there's 2 things. One is the way in, and the other is the power of stories as a way in, or power of stories even if you're not doing, per se, something abstract. So I like this idea that you were holding up how Churchill or the rocket, whatever, got us there. I mean, I worry that it's a little dark. It's like bombs and missiles. That's probably not necessarily always the best thing. I often leave SEAL team out because of that reason. It's like too scary, too real. I mean, there are some really gross scenarios, right? Person walks into a hospital. All right, upstairs in the hospital, there are 5 people, all on life support. Each one needs an organ. That person is a perfect match for each of the 5. So you put a hood over the person's head, you grab the person, and they become the donor for each of the 5. 5-1. There's all sorts of examples. They're all gross, right? Nice to see you. Right, you see what I'm saying? Everyone's like, you can't do that. That's horrible. I'm like, well, wait, a minute ago you were 5-1. Right, so you got to choose your examples carefully. I think the Churchill one I really like, but even martial military ones are a bit kind of, scary making. Yeah.
I want to mention, I think when people came up with ideas, there was, as we were talking about yesterday, an expression or in small group learning as well as in team-based learning. And that I think that's an area that our faculty, we're thinking too far ahead.
Yes.
On what are the objectives that we need to meet, and they did not get the right answer on age or right now, that we can sometimes not instill enough to provide
Yes.
the connection in the moment when words are starting to two steps past. So I thought that you did that very nicely, but I just wanted to bring that up because that's a really important skill, not just for that individual skill, like when they speak up, that they are affirmed for participating, but also when you've got teams and teams with different.
Oh, yes.
How you balance that.
I value this point. I value that you value the point. There's interesting twists to this point, because I also think like being relationally close and being acknowledging is very important. And you try to summarize, as you said so well, you try to summarize as closely as possible to what the person actually said. That requires practice too. But I will say, to this issue of the classrooms of today that are kind of sometimes complicated by all sorts of important social reasons, summarizing sometimes is like it's almost like you're taking their words and now you, dear sir, are saying them for them. It's almost like you've stolen or... so I just want to be just careful. I agree. I surely agree. But just carefully, with a little trepidation, when you are a summarizer, right? All right, let me just show you. Oh, no, yes. Eyes can do it, yeah. Right, so your body is an instrument of sort of affirmation. All right, so I just want to show one last thing. It's like this little closing thing. So for those, oh yeah, of course. Me too.
So I think, to pull out like what's really important, what's something that's really important that you want to share from a book, I think is a great way to.
Oh, thanks for saying that. So interestingly, guys, I had a pretty bad speech thing. I still speak, obviously, absurdly. And I was also very, very small and shy and didn't like being in front of crowds. So part of what I was also doing in my lifetime was trying to work out stuff. And one of the things I was like horrible at, not quite good at yet, was the idea of reading something in public. Is I couldn't read out loud. So that's part of my life effort to try to do that. So that's super nice. So anyone who's sort of in my generation, is there anybody here in my generation? Anyone who's around my generation might remember we used to handwrite prescriptions on paper. So there's this thing where you'd say the medicine's name, the number of milligrams or micrograms or whatever, and then you'd say this SIG, S-I-G line. So my little SIG line is this. 1, by mouth, as needed. Use as directed. All right. So yeah, uncover, clarify, and expand as directed. But more importantly, I just want to say thank you to the philosophers. Thank you to you. I hope that it was both philosophy and joy, and that you can have kind of good large group and small group pedagogy as a consequence of this iterative, interactive, perturbable stuff. So thank you. Just for kicks, that's a statue of Aristotle, whom we didn't do. Over there is a German stamp of the presumed image of Kant. Over here is the great Thomas Aquinas, and disturbingly, very disturbingly, that is Jeremy Bentham, but not his head, but for the rest of him, sitting at UCL.